Passionate about sustainability, energy, and climate? You're in the right place. Welcome to Energetic. I'm Maureen Cornelis, and together we will engage with people who dedicate their lives to climate justice and making a just energy transition happen. They may be activists, scientists, policymakers, or other enthusiasts, just like you. Let their life stories and insights inspire you to build a better future for people and the planet.
Hello, I'm Luke Hayward from the Climate and Energy team of the European Environmental Bureau. We believe that we can reach 100% renewable energy by 2040. To get there, we will need a lot of renewables, and we want as many people as possible to directly benefit from this shift to 100% renewables. When people hear support for renewables, many people think of rich people putting solar panels on the roof of their houses. And this has been an important part of the story. But it is very important to also allow households living in rented accommodation or in buildings with multiple homes to benefit from renewables. This can be done in different ways, for example, by creating energy communities. This will not only allow us to build more renewables, it will also allow us to help those people most affected by high prices for fossil fuels. Helping vulnerable households move away from fossil fuels is all the more important as carbon pricing will be introduced across the EU for fossil fuels used in transport and heating in 2027. The EU has recognized this, and some of the revenues from carbon pricing will be used to finance a social climate fund. This money can be used in different ways to help vulnerable households, but EU countries have not yet stated what they want to use the money for. We are today releasing a short report at the EEB with some programs we like that show how the social climate fund can be used to promote renewable energy for the most vulnerable households. We want renewable energy to be a tool for more social justice. Let's ensure the Social Climate Fund is used as transparently and directly as possible to help vulnerable households. We have invited someone who knows a lot about energy poverty and how programs need to be designed to actually reach the most vulnerable households. I'm very pleased that Miłka Stępień from CE Bankwatch is with us today.
Today's episode is brought to you with the generous sponsor of the European Environmental Bureau, Europe's largest network of environmental groups. It brings together over 170 organizations from 35 countries. Its mission is to fight for sustainable development and environmental justice and give people a real voice in shaping a greener future. Today, we meet Milka Stępień, the Just Transition Campaign Coordinator for Central and Eastern Europe at CE Bankwatch Network. Based in Eastern Wielkopolska, one of the Poland's key Just Transition regions, Milka has been a dedicated environmental, climate and social activist for over 25 years. Her mission is to ensure that the shift to renewable energy and green practice benefits both the environment and the communities. Milka is working at the local, regional, national, and EU levels to introduce sustainable solutions that are both environmental friendly and socially fair. She champions participatory approaches, ensuring that people have a say in how regions transition to greener economies. Milka's deep connection to the region and extensive experience make her the most powerful advocate for a fair and inclusive energy transition. It's such an honor to have you today, as you will share your journey, the challenges of driving the green transition in Central and Eastern Europe, and how renewables can offer a path out of energy poverty. Thank you, Milka. Welcome to Energetic.
Thank you, Maureen, very much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here with you.
So, Milka, you've been an environmental and social activist for over 25 years. So, what inspired you to get involved in this work, and how has your focus evolved over time?
Well, I think I started being active already in high school. So it was, I think I was always a very sensitive person, really looking into how the world functioned. And it's just part of my makeup that if I see that something isn't functioning well, I try and come up with ways to solve it. And I think initially, this was very uncoordinated, sort of chaotic, but I did, try different things already in high school, like the cleaning the planet. And this was in the 1990s. So you have to, in Poland, ecological topics, maybe they were somewhere, but it wasn't a very popular or as widespread topic as it is right now. So we did some of the things that people are doing on a more of a mass scale at that time. So right now it's something that a lot of people do, but back then it was actually sort of very few people really looking into environmental issues, even less into climate issues. Yeah, so clean the world, planting trees and stuff like that. So it's something I started doing in the 1990s when I was probably around 16 years old. And
you're the mother of Friday for Future, right?
Perhaps. I'm not sure. I mean, it wasn't something that I really developed, wide recognition for. I just really I could see how badly the earth around us is being treated. And I also at that time was sort of aware that this was negatively impacting people and our health. I mean, you had a huge problem with smog already there in Poland at that time. It might have even been worse than right now. There was a problem with water pollution and things like that. So the main difference, I think, is that it didn't receive the media attention or the widespread attention that it gets right now. But we did actually have some educational classes at school already on ecological development. Yeah, so perhaps, yes, maybe I'm actually in Poland. One of the organizations is called Parents for the Climate. I work with them sometimes. I'm not a part of this organization, but definitely I think there were quite a few people already back in the 1990s that were initiating, the whole activities that we're working on right now. And already then I also realized that a lot of these issues are just not about people not wanting to live better, but about bad governance and bad decisions, bad political decisions. So quite quickly, I also got really interested in, what say do we have as normal citizens in the decisions that are made and how the governance structures function that enable making decisions that are bad for people and for the environment. So I mean, on a very low level at that time, at the level that I could sort of understand, and this developed over the next years.
And that's interesting because you said you started in the 1990s. It's also when Poland opened up to democracy and to different ways of doing things with more accountability, maybe expected from policymakers, maybe more expected transparency as well. So there seems to have been quite a shift at that moment. We recently had an episode with somebody from Latvia who expressed this kind of dichotomy exactly in the 90s and the fact that there were so many things that hadn't been done before that needed to be addressed right from the 90s. So how has the situation evolved? And you, in this meantime, because I've seen in your profile that you've worked in Africa as well. So you've traveled the world and you're back to Poland as well. So can you tell us more?
Well, I was actually born in Africa. I grew up and was raised in Zambia until I was about 12 years old. And then I moved to Poland. So I didn't grow up in Poland. I came to Poland in the 1990s, which also meant I had a slightly different background because it was a country that had been very closed for decades. And so I was quite unusual in a small town like the town that I live in also currently. It's a population of 75,000 in Konin, where I live. And it is a mining region. I also come from a mining family. So my father was a mining engineer. My other uncle's also a mining engineer, and another of my uncles worked in the energy plant. So I come from a background typical for people from coal regions. So, this helps me to sort of understand different perspectives of what I'm working on now. But going back to what you asked about the 1990s, I think there are other dichotomies because on the one hand, you started having the introduction of certain standards in terms of environmental and climate issues. On the other hand, you also had some bad things coming from this opening, like, for example, eco-dumping. So there were cases, especially in the 1990s, of primarily Western European dumping of, for example, pollution, waste, etc., into Central and Eastern Europe. And I think this is one of the main reasons why now I find it such a pleasure to work on, the Central and Eastern European case, because I often see that there is a misunderstanding of the strengths and the challenges that Central and Eastern Europe has experienced over the last 30 years. Not only the gains that we got from, moving to the new system, but also the losses, because the 1990s are also known in most of Central and Eastern Europe as a time of huge corruption and developing a lot of companies that were not looking at social and environmental sustainability. They were looking to make a fast buck, basically. So this also negatively impacted. So, and in my work right now, there's also, looking at how we can maintain high environmental standards, but also show that it's not always the case that what we got entering the European Union is purely positive. Some of the things that we got through this were actually negative. And for example, the recycling system in Poland during the socialist times were actually better than they were throughout most of the 90s and into the 21st century. So we're actually rebuilding something that existed beforehand. And I'm not saying that any of these periods had only advantages. They both had, definitely from the environmental and social perspective, both advantages and disadvantages. I try to bring more nuance to the discussion of what is happening in Central and Eastern Europe, but also of what we've experienced as a region.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you, with your extensive experience, you can also kind of build on this past experience to also see what could work in the future. But there has been so many social changes as well. You mentioned that you come yourself from a family of miners, and somehow today you could be seen or perceived as an enemy of the mines. So the discussion around the table, the dinner table, must be quite heated. So how do you create, or let's say, make this kind of conversation happen in a way that is actually kind of positive? How do you make sure that people know that you're not closing the mines just for the sake of closing the mine, but because it's not good for the environment and their health either?
Well, I mean, primarily, I do try to avoid such conversations sort of in the family sphere, because it is a difficult topic and it can become very heated. But I have talked with my uncle, for example, extensively, and I've tried to sort of show him my perspective. He's talked to me about his perspective. And a lot of the work I do is actually about listening and hearing other perspectives and trying to find consensus. So as an environmental and climate network of organizations, we have a very concrete approach. And there are certain positions that for us are obvious that we will not back down on. So this is, for example, the need to close, for example, fossil fuel related industries. But this is something I show as something I can't really go back on. And then when I go into a conversation with people who have a different perspective, I try to understand why it is difficult for them to get on the same page. I try to find ways in which they can see it also as an opportunity and answer their fears, because a lot of, this difficulties in talking is about fears. It's about change. It's about people having to really change their lifestyles, change, losing their jobs, being afraid for their families. And if you come in simply as an environmental and climate activist and tell them, okay, we don't care, this has to happen, then you're not really helping the cause. What you need to do is you need to understand that this will have impacts on concrete people. And you really need to think about how to address these fears that they have. So again, a lot of the work that we do is about also finding ways in which we can address the social impacts of this transition and not sort of ignoring the fact that you will have impacted people. This is probably one of the main reasons why I work on the Just Transition Fund, because it is about consultation. It's about bringing people to the same table and really, really opening up about, what issues people see with the whole transition and what they need to feel at least a bit more comfortable with it or open up to this possibility. Unfortunately, of course, we know this is going to happen anyway. But if we ignore social fears and concerns, it's going to be more difficult to implement. And it's also going to be something that will cause a lot of social unrest, as we've already seen in various cases throughout Europe.
Yeah, indeed. I can see that you really put participatory approaches in the green transition the center of your work, and you make sure that the local communities do have a say in how the transition happens. Do you intervene also at the level of how renewables are rolled out, or let's say the decision-making process are really inclusive, and how let's say renewables can become tools to address social exclusion and, on the contrary, foster a better approach and help, reduce energy poverty? Are there any kind of targets that you have, and any also kind of recipes that you would like to share today with the listeners of this episode?
Well, I work on policy and legislation. So going back to my initial statement about the fact that, we need to find out who's making the decisions, how they're making them, why they're making them, and improve the decisions that are made. So, over the years, I've worked in a lot of different fields. And this is probably the first time in my life that I really feel that I'm finally at the point or in the place where I can actually impact decision making. And this is hard work. This is very difficult work because it requires a very high level of expertise, a lot of dedication, a lot of perseverance. So the way we impact, how renewables are rolled out is very extensive, because we do things from capacity building on the ground, where we meet with various people who can both decide or perhaps set up, for example, an energy community. And we teach them about the legal possibilities, the technical possibilities, how this can be done, and what they need in order to make it happen. We look at the legislation, both sometimes on the local and regional level, like looking at urban planning, for example, indicating, possible solutions. Then we go to the regional level. We look at, for example, various plans and calls for proposals for things for funding, basically. So looking at how the funding is targeted and, for example, commenting whether we think this will work, what should be changed in order to make it more effective. We look at national level legislation. So in a lot of countries that we work in, this is one of the main barriers, actually. So in many of the countries, we know that people are very interested in setting up, if not individual renewables, then at least energy communities, or are thinking about ways in which they can solve their energy and heating problems, because heating is a second topic that we also work on extensively. And the national legislation frequently needs to be made friendlier. So it's often written in such a way that it doesn't really reach the targets that it's supposed to. And this is for a variety of reasons. I mean, of course, I could go into it, but we do a lot of work on making sure that the legislation at the national level is set up in such a way that it makes it comfortable and easy for people to sort of use the funds to implement renewables. And then on the EU level, we also work on the legislation. So we bring the things that we've learned in the regions, in the countries. We go to the European level and tell them, look, guys, this isn't working, and this is how you should fix it, basically. Sometimes they listen to us on all of these levels, sometimes not. But I think the style of work that we do as Bankwatch is, well, first of all, it's very time consuming, I have to say, because we're everywhere. But on the other level, it's extremely effective, because bringing this on the ground experience and then, sort of conveying it through these different levels is something that not a lot of people or organizations do. And it can really, really show where the issues lay. So I think our work over the last years has really impacted a lot of, for example, we've led to a much broader possibility of having technical assistance. So technical assistance allows, the regions to learn more about how they can implement green solutions, including renewables.
So do you think there is more, let's say, listening from the part of or willingness to listen from the policymakers? But isn't it quite new? So I can see you are nodding. So can you tell us how it was before and how it has evolved? Have you seen something, a shift happen somehow?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, I've been doing activism for about 25 years, and usually, like, until I would say probably about 5 years ago, most of the time we were considered sort of the enemies or the crazy people who are always bugging them about everything. So, I mean, I did a lot of monitoring of spending, for example, of municipal budgets or access to information and things like that. So we were very nagging in a way, right? So we would keep writing, can you please provide this information for us? If they didn't want to provide information to us, then we would take them to court, for example. So in many ways, this set us in sort of an opposition situation. Because climate change and environmental issues were not considered as very important, this also led to any people, activists or NGOs that work on such issues to not be treated as equal partners. And in Poland and in much of Central and Eastern Europe, until very recently, most people did not believe in climate change. So this changed over the course of, I would say, 3 to 5 years as well.
What happened?
I think it's a mixture of things, but a lot of it was actually media attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also the change of the approach at the European level, showing the decision to move towards green targets. I think it was a mixture of things. Friday for Future, the huge climate protests throughout Europe and across the world, in fact. So suddenly from a niche topic, and it was a niche topic, I have to really say that, I've talked about the climate since the 1990s. It was really a niche topic. There was more interest in, for example, air pollution or water pollution, things like that earlier on. But the climate, it was always a topic that we talked about in green circles, something that we could push out of our bubble because everyone was saying that, we're just oversensitive, we're nagging, and also we have to remember that a lot of the green movements had to, because we weren't invited to the table frequently, we were mostly present through protests, happenings, some sort of anything that could get the media attention. And I've had experiences from years ago when I would prepare, a very expert level sort of meeting with great experts that, could have solved some sort of issue on the local or regional level, and no interest from anybody in the decision-making circles to attend something like this because, they didn't see the problem, the necessity of taking this on. So, I mean, I think this is typical for Central and Eastern Europe because in Western Europe, this sort of awareness of environmental issues, especially, but also climate issues, I think came a bit earlier. And then I think about 5 years ago, this really changed. So finally, the expert knowledge that I developed over 25 years was something I could bring to the table and not be treated as the crazy green person who is always talking about environmental and climate issues. So finally, it's like, okay, this is a person who actually knows about these things. And NGOs, I think, have also increased, especially in the type of organizations that we have. We have more people working now. We have more experts. So we are bringing a completely new standard to the conversations. For me, maybe one of the more depressing things in relation to this is that sometimes I am surprised by the lack of knowledge among decision makers about a lot of things, and that very frequently we are the most knowledgeable people in the room. And I think this is a double-edged sword because on the one hand, it's great because we can impact, for example, policy more. On the other, it's negative because this means that decisions are being made by people who sometimes don't have a very high knowledge of what they're making decisions about.
It's really interesting what you just said, because 5 years ago, it's also when we started to see way more money injected into the just transition conversation. And also renewables became really mainstream. They move from being something a little bit niche and only for, let's say, people who wanted really to have renewables to something that, I mean, there were recent figures recently released at EU level showing that renewables are making most of the electricity mixed, and that's really super inspiring and encouraging somehow. But it has been quite a shift over the past years. And what you just said about pollution is also quite interesting, because there are some research coming from all around the planet, but from one group in particular in the US, who showed that there is a consensus against pollution. Like, everybody hates pollution. Not everybody hates climate change, because those people, as you just said, don't really understand what it is, or don't have any prior knowledge, or maybe are overwhelmed or terrified by the concept. But they know what pollution is about, and they don't want pollution at all. So somehow there is this kind of way of entering the conversation by the, let's say, pollution angle. And, that's really, really kind of fascinating to see that the solution somehow exists, but the overall, let's say, discourse can be polarized, because people won't like certain terms like climate change, whereas it's all about, it's all about climate change. And you said yourself, you come from just transition regions, where there are some money injected, and there is the kind of social climate fund. There are some funds that are being discussed. There is also the emission trading systems with the carbon credits. That, I mean, the discussions around those kind of topics is, again, very heated. And you yourself, in your job, you're like trying to bring things back to the concrete level. Like, this is affecting the life of the people. There is pollution. So we need to use those instruments to address pollution, to improve the quality of life of the people, the quality of their health, the quality of their homes. And that's exactly where, addressing energy poverty comes in, right?
Yes, I mean, precisely. If you The EU funds are an amazing instrument if used properly. I mean, if they're taken down into the regions, into the places which need them the most, into the groups that are needed the most, they could really tackle a lot of the social issues that will continue to grow in connection with growing energy prices, growing heating prices, the general issues that we foresee coming up. And I mean, this is very closely linked with renewables, right? So we're still at a very initial phase. So, I mean, this is something maybe of sort of a personal contradiction that I have, which is, on the one hand, as a person who knows how bad the climate situation is, I know how fast we have to go with certain decisions and changes. And I know that we're not going fast enough. On the other hand, if you look at the social situation in a lot of the regions and countries which have to introduce the most changes, you can't do this quickly. You can't do it faster, because they need a hell of a lot of capacity building. They really need, I mean, we all do, because, the plan is pretty much, all of Europe transform everything, okay? And be innovative about it, okay? We are not prepared as a whole continent to suddenly switch that quickly. And I think this is something that, people really need to hear, okay? At the EU level, sometimes I hear, okay, they need to implement more innovative projects in the regions. And I'm asking, okay, how do you do this in regions where you've been losing the most dynamic parts of population for 30 years, where you have aging populations, where you have brain drain, etc.? Okay, so guys, come to the regions and see what you're talking about, instead of, discussing it at the Brussels level. So I think this is something of what we bring to the table. But coming back sort of to how the EU funds need to be used, it's also the fact that frequently the EU funds are not used by the people who need them the most. And this is very difficult to tackle. It's very time consuming.
How comes?
Because it's easier to do big projects, basically. Okay, so if you help, I don't know, a steel factory transition, you have a huge sum going in, it's done quickly, you can show that it's been completed and achieved. It does have a huge decarbonization achievement, right? So you're decarbonizing a whole steel factory, for example, and you're switching to something that is more less emitting. But what you really need is need a huge amount of small projects. Okay. You need like dozens of projects for retrofitting buildings, and not only public buildings, but also private buildings. You need energy and heating advisors, independent ones, that are proactive and actually go to people's houses, especially among, communities that are not so proactive. And they help these people to sort of use the EU funds to apply for certain things, to change the way they produce energy or use energy or participate generally in these processes. You need, energy communities across the whole country. So you need decentralized, small funding. And this is not easy to do with a system like, generally with the funding systems that we have. So it is happening, but we are still at a very early stage of sort of discovering completely different ways of doing these things. And I think the just transition regions are a bit sort of pioneering regions in these terms, which doesn't mean they will do everything great. They will make mistakes, but we can learn from them. And this is what I think is important.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the important part about trying, about doing mistakes. It's you need to learn your lessons from them. But right now, if you had like some kind of magical power, what would you do to make to accelerate things and make sure that there is more fairness, that people are treated better? And what would you like to see if you really could imagine the best possible outcome?
I would see offices in every single municipality, which would have an energy auditor, someone who's an expert on heating, and maybe additionally someone that can sort of support in applying for grants. So sort of these one-stop shops with access to experts in every single municipality, not only the big ones, because the big ones actually have a lot of people who know stuff about this, but especially the rural and smaller municipalities throughout Europe.
That's particularly where people affected by energy poverty are, right?
Exactly. And these are also the people who frequently don't know how to access funds, don't even know that they can access them, don't know how to go about it, don't know which funds are perfect for them. And they also have problems with accessing independent information because you have a lot of companies offering various services, but they might ask for too much money for what they want, or they might suggest a solution that's not really good for you. So if you talk about these energy and proactive advisors on the municipal level, this is actually the best way to tackle energy poverty. Why? Because energy poverty is usually among vulnerable communities. And these are communities that, for various reasons, infrequently access funds. Okay. They usually have a variety of reasons, health reasons, or just sort of how they function in the society, financial reasons, why they haven't been accessing thus far. So you need to come up with solutions for that. Energy poverty is also very frequently linked to communal living. So, for example, in Poland, there is still an issue of not being able to set up energy communities in blocks of flats, while we have a lot of blocks of flats left over from the communist period. So this shows, again, going back to what I was talking about, why you need to change legislation, you need to introduce certain solutions that are more convenient for how it specifically works in each country. And primarily what I would like to say is that for Central and Eastern Europe, a huge issue is that energy poverty is going to be less of a problem than heating poverty. So it is very linked in many ways, but the main thing that we are going to have to solve in Central and Eastern Europe is the issue of how do we heat houses. And I could give you a specific example that for most households, the highest cost is their heating bills. Okay, not their energy bills, but their heating bills. And this is, of course, also linked with the need to retrofit and sort of insulate houses, whether they be, more communal style living or individual houses, but also coming up with good solutions for heating these various buildings.
How do they heat at the moment? And why is this shift particularly necessary? And what kind of solutions are envisioned?
In just transition regions, so the former coal regions in Central and Eastern Europe, a lot of the heating was provided as waste heat from the coal-fired energy plants. You had district heating, basically.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So now what you have when you're closing down all the energy plants, or when you will be closing down the energy plants, is you suddenly have district heating systems that will no longer be functioning. So you have to rework them. And this will be a problem across all of Central and Eastern Europe. So what's interesting is that in Western Europe, you have much fewer district heating systems. In Central and Eastern Europe, you have quite a lot, especially in some countries like Poland. Poland has a huge amount of district heating systems. So this needs to be tackled. Another thing is related to air pollution. So in rural areas, so outside of the district heating systems, a lot of the houses until quite recently were heated by coal-fired boilers, which in recent years have been sort of exchanged. But it's all linked, because if you're phasing out coal, you're also phasing out these individual heating systems and boilers that were run on coal. And that had a very negative impact on the air quality in Poland. Well, we are famous for a very bad air quality in winter, especially because this is when we have, the heating systems all working full power. So that's why I think it's going to be a slightly different shift in Central and Eastern Europe than it is in Western Europe in terms of where we need to focus our energy. And there are already in development district heating systems that are based on renewables. These are called fourth generation district heating systems. And actually, one of our member organization, Friends of the Earth Slovakia, is currently working on such a system in one of the municipalities, Prievidza, in Slovakia. And they're in the process of developing such a heating system for the municipality.
So what I understand is that the existing, let's say, district heating system need to kind of shift to renewable energies. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, there is, again, one dichotomy here is that the district heating systems are kind of efficient in a way. They supply a lot of homes, so they are quite positive in a way. But at the same time, since they are legacy of, let's say, the very carbon intensive industry, they have to be discontinued. So the conversation around district heating needs to evolve in order to take into account those parameters. And at the same time, people are equipped with coal heating system. And I guess that for hot water, it is the same. So they also need to shift to another system, right? So what kind of solutions is proposed to these people?
I mean, if you're talking about district heating, this would be sort of these fourth generation district heating systems, which are a mixture of you have a grid basically that through various means provides heating. Usually it's linked with PV, a sort of a PV farm, geothermal, maybe some sort of heat pump solution, etc. I mean, it really depends a lot on the municipality. So again, this is something that requires a lot of planning and quite a bit of time for implementation. And I mean, basically what we're trying to do right now is to get all of the municipalities to start thinking about it and to start really finding solutions. In my hometown at the moment in Konin, they're setting up a geothermal heating system that will provide some of the heat. And the solutions are diverse depending on where you're at, basically. In terms of individual households, I mean, definitely what we need to be looking at is energy efficiency, retrofitting, insulation. So just making our houses less prone to be cold, and then setting them up also with probably a variety of a link of PV panels and heat pumps. But I mean, this is all something that is extremely technical. And that's why I'm saying you need energy and heating advisors on the local level, so that every single person that's, sort of, or company that's thinking about, what can we do about our energy and heating needs can come to such a person and ask, okay, so what should I think about? Where should I look for support? Where should I look for money, etc.? So that's why I mentioned this as a really, really huge need. Because, I visit the municipalities, like some of the smaller municipalities in the region. These are really small offices. They don't have anybody in these offices that has the knowledge. So what we need to do, we're talking about green jobs. What we need to do is we need to produce a huge amount of experts and send them out into Europe, basically, so that they can, basically provide this information to, I don't know, the lady that lives next door to you is asking you, and you say, you know what, I don't have the answer, but I know the number to, the energy expert at the municipality. And I've heard that she really gives great information. So, this is how it should work. But of course, I'm talking about an ideal world. It is actually being implemented partially in Eastern Wielkopolska, in the region that I live in. So they're implementing a project called Life After Coal. It's a life project. And within its scope, it will be an energy advisor for each municipality within the Just Transition region here. So I think it's an amazing solution.
Yeah, thank you so much for this very inspiring example and somehow conclusion. Thank you so much. It was so insightful and I learned so much. And you're really the embodiment that we need to think global but act local to make things happen, right? So thank you so much, Milka, and the European Environmental Bureau for making this conversation possible. And to our listeners, please tune in a couple of weeks for the next episode of this series on renewables' role in tackling energy poverty and creating better jobs in the EU's journey to climate neutrality. It's a 3-episode mini-series, so thank you so much. And thank you again, Milka, for all those insights.
Thank you so much, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Energetic. It's been a pleasure diving deep into the world of sustainability and the just energy transition with some of the most forward-thinking mouths out there. I'm Maureen Cornelis, your host from policy consultancy Next Energy Consumer, and it's been an incredible journey growing this podcast together with you, our knowledgeable and passionate listeners. Since 2021, we've shared countless stories, insights, and ideas over more than 40 episodes, and it's all thanks to your support and enthusiasm. If you enjoyed our journey so far and want to help us keep the conversation going, why not support us on Patreon? Every bit helps us bring more inspiring content your way. Check out the show notes for the link. And hey, if you're a part of an organization that shares our passion for a sustainable and inclusive energy future, we're excited to explore sponsorship opportunities with you. It's a fantastic way to connect with a dedicated audience and make an even bigger impact together. Shout out to the fantastic Igor Mihailovich from Podcast Media Factory for his incredible sound design work, making every episode a joy to listen to. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Energetic on your favorite podcast platform. And if you think a friend or a colleague could benefit from our episode, we'd love for you to spread the word. It helps us grow and keep the energy transition conversation alive. Sharing is caring. Follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to stay engaged and update on all things energetic. Thanks once again for lending your ears. Until next time.